There wasn't anything super notable that happened around the NBA on the court last night, so I wanted to take this time to talk about Marc Gasol's jersey retirement, which happened last night after the Grizzlies-Sixers game. And the reason I wanted to talk about it is because it's such a prime example of one of the biggest philosophies I have when it comes to the NBA, when it comes to sports, and it's one that I always like to talk about. It's one I always like to preach about whenever I get the chance, and this is obviously such a good chance, and that's, it's not all about championships, right? I think this is such a good lesson for every single NBA fan to learn or to hear ahead of the playoffs, right? It's not all championship or bust. When we look back at certain eras of certain teams and players, in the modern era, that would be like Lob City Clippers, James Harden's Rockets, the Dame and CJ Blazers. A lot of people will just boil it down to, well, they didn't win a championship, so it was meaningless. It was nothing. It didn't matter. And I've never liked that philosophy for two big reasons. One, not every team can win a championship, right? There's one champion every single year that leaves 29 other teams ringless at the end of every season. So there's just only so many teams that can win a championship. And so because that's the case, and also just because naturally it's so insanely difficult to win a championship. It's not just about talent. It's about having the right talent and making sure that talent fits and it's cohesive and everyone likes each other and having the right coach and the right system. And obviously, getting lucky in terms of injuries and health, and then also maybe getting a little bit of luck along the way from your opponent and just random ref stuff. There's so much that goes into it, right? And so again, not every team can win a championship, and I just think there's something to be said about appreciating the journey and how, and look, it's admittedly a tough balance because at the end of the day, winning a championship is the ultimate goal. That's why everyone plays the game, but it's just you have to take joy in the journey. I think that's what makes it fun. That's what makes it more satisfying. And from a fan perspective, I just think again, everyone wants to win a championship, but I don't think that means that take the Blazers, for example, in the Dame and CJ era. Yeah, they didn't win a championship, but does that make the joy that the fans had during that era any less real? Does it make the joy that they had watching Dame and CJ, two, unheralded, undersized guards just torch defenses on a nightly basis? Does that make the memories of that, of Dame's insane game winners against Houston and OKC, CJ's, insane Game 7 performance against Denver, does that make that any less fun? Because the joy is still there. The memories you have about that were still there. And it's such a prime, and the Grizzlies are such a prime example of that with the grit and grind era, where they didn't win a championship, but you know what? They just had so many great memories to the point where you saw the core four guys back there last night. It was Gasol, it was Mike Conley, Tony Allen, Zach Randolph. Okay, they didn't bring the team a championship, but you know what they did? They brought so much joy to that franchise, to that city as a fan base, and that's just I can't just throw that all away just because it didn't result in the ultimate goal. The journey was still great. And that's worth celebrating, and it's especially worth celebrating. And this is the second point I want to make about why it's not always about a championship, which is that every team has different expectations. Every franchise has different expectations, right? You have the Lakers and Celtics, which every year is basically championship or bust. That's a small majority of the NBA. A lot of teams, only have one championship at most, if any. And so when you consider that, sometimes it's about making steps. It's not all about the ultimate goal, but it's about taking steps as an organization to break through to new heights, to new barriers. Again, Grizzlies, perfect example of that, where before the grit and grind era, they moved to Memphis in 2000 or 2001. They have 3 playoff appearances from 04 to 06, but they get swept each time in the first round. And so they were just they weren't anything special as a franchise. And then the core four shows up and they rattle off 7 straight playoff appearances. They take down the Spurs as the 1 seed in the 1-8 matchup in 2011. They were only a handful of teams have ever done that. They make their first ever conference finals in 2013. And that, again, it's not a championship, but for a Grizzlies team and an organization and a fan base that hadn't experienced much of any kind of winning before that, to become a perennial playoff contender and a thorn in the side of so many teams, to build up your franchise to the point of respectability where everyone loves this team, and to have they're now known as the grit and grind era Grizzlies. It's the same thing of what I just said before. Where it's with the joy with fans. I can't that can't just mean nothing because it didn't result in a championship. It has to matter to fans to play. Like that's and so like you saw on Twitter last night during Gasol's jersey retirement, like I saw so many Grizzlies fans, so many NBA fans, like again, I'm like with those four guys, like taking the picture and like just wow, how special it was to see those guys reunited because they brought like just so much joy, you know, and so much success. Again, it's not a championship, and so maybe you could say like, oh, well, they're loser mentality, right? Act like you've been there before, but they haven't. The Grizzlies hadn't been there before until the grit and grind era, and so now the standards raised, right? Now, you know, just getting to the playoffs isn't enough for them. Just getting to the second round is not enough for them. Ja Morant, like those guys, like they have championship aspirations, and part of that is the foundation set by Gasol, Allen, Conley, Randolph, and so again, that's not a championship, but like that's not nothing. And so the reason I wanted to talk about this is because, you know, Gasol's jersey retirement was such a, you know, easy time for me to do it because I think those grit and grind Grizzlies are such a great example of the points I just made where like, again, like the journey is what's fun and that matters and that's worth something. And it also matters to an organization that, you know, again, they're not the Lakers and Celtics. That's not always championship or bust, who had to build stuff up. And again, that matters. And I think that's really important to learn. In general, I think it's really important to learn ahead of the playoffs where you have certain teams where, like, think like the Pelicans, right? If the Pelicans make the second round, like, that's still a great season. It's still successful. Again, obviously you want to win the championship, but, like, there's steps that need to be taken. And I think the grit and grind Grizzlies took those steps for that organization in a way that was just so special and so memorable to watch. It was so fun. And just, like, the pure joy we all got from watching that, like, that's worth looking back on with a smile and recounting, like, you know, all the awesome times, even if it didn't result in a championship. And for the organization, I think it's especially special. And I think that's why they've been retiring. They retired Randolph's jersey. They retired Tony Allen's jersey. It's why they retired Gasol's jersey. They're going to retire Mike Conley's jersey when it's all said and done. I know a lot of people will clown them like, oh, you retired jerseys for guys who didn't even win a championship. Like, yeah, because certain guys mean more to a franchise than others. Franchises have different standards. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like the Lakers and Celtics have been around for decades. Grizzlies just got to Memphis this century, and they were only in Vancouver for like I think 4 or 5 years prior to that. So they're not such an old franchise. So just different things mean different things to different franchises and to different cities, and there's really nothing wrong with that. And it's a philosophy that I really truly believe in, and it's why I always try to talk about it. So whenever there's an opportunity to talk about it, I try to, because I think we live in a very like championship or bust mindset when it comes to teams, when it comes to players, and I just don't think that's a healthy mindset to have of the game. I think it's important to enjoy the journey, to take joy in certain steps of the journey, while ultimately still pursuing the ultimate goal of a championship. I think it's very easy to do both, and I think we need to do a better job collectively as NBA fans of having that balance.